Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Major Jason Seba, and I'm a Deputy Branch Chief within the Information Protection and Engineering Division of the Space and Missile Systems Center here in Los Angeles. And I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to introduce our lunchtime speaker, Mr. Frank Konieczny. Mr. Konieczny is the Chief Technology Officer within the Office of Information Dominance and the Chief Information Officer. This is within the Secretary of the Air Force. Prior to taking on his current responsibilities, he had extensive experience in industry where he worked as a systems analyst, chief programmer, project manager, and a business unit manager. He was also a chief scientist and chief technology officer. Additionally, he has completed advanced degrees in engineering, administrative sciences, and computer science. Mr. Konieczny has a great vision of the future of the Air Force fueled by innovation and is here to speak today about adaptive information technology innovation and its role in the joint information environment. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. Frank Konieczny.
Turn myself on. I'm also a walker. So the interesting is, I'm glad you all came back from lunch, or for lunch. You could eat. I have 4 kids. They're always eating in front of me, so I'm used to this. And you can ask questions whenever you like, because I'm used to that too. My job as CTO is to go around and to talk to industry, talk to government, and tell everyone what the Air Force is trying to do in terms of the enterprise, in terms of the future architecture. And some of this is related to what we're going to get into today, is how we look at it from an enterprise viewpoint. Because in the morning session it was interesting, because a lot of the stuff is the same thing that we've been talking about for a long time already, except that you're looking at it from the ground systems viewpoint. We look at it at the SAF's office from the Air Force enterprise viewpoint. And so we have to take a broader look of how everything works together and how we want it to work together. So we bring in various communities. And you're going to see some of the stuff we're going to talk about today is how we bring in communities from A2, from A4, from A6 together and to actually come out with something. Okay, the title is Adaptive for a good reason, because we want to be able to have a way of changing things, a way of looking at it, because what normally happens, and you guys are all used to this, after, like, you put out a procurement and it comes out and the architecture sits there forever, for 5, 10 years, and you don't have any way of changing anything. So we want to figure a way of how do we actually move the Air Force into a more industry-like environment where the change is like every 6 months, every year, as opposed to every 10 years. Okay. So we looked at it. How would we do this? How can we, effectively integrate new technologies into the Air Force, into the mission? And we want to do this in a way that's more dynamic than it's been before. What process can we use? Are there any tools, patterns to support this? And how do we actually integrate this into the JIE? And I do mean integrate it into the JIE, not let the JIE integrate on top of us, because we are a driving function in the JIE. Okay, where to start? Okay, we looked at everything and we decided from the enterprise viewpoint, the only thing that we really had was the Air Force Enterprise Architecture. And the only one that we had was the 2010 architecture. And from the 2010 architecture, we decided that, of course, we were looking at the infrastructure more than anything else in the mission. So we went to the infrastructure mission area, and we derived from that roughly 130 plus functions. And those are the categories of the functions. And amazingly enough, when Michelle brought up the other functions for the ground stations, most of those functions are sitting right in that enterprise architecture. Shouldn't be a surprise, because there's lots of functions that are the same across all of the Air Force. And you may not believe that. You may not. But we've had A4 together logistics say that with A2, and they both say, oh, we have the same problems. And it's really difficult for them to believe that they actually have the same problems. Okay. How do we approach the problem? Well, okay. We decided that the only way we're going to do this is that we had to go into the community and ask them what their problems and their issues were. We wanted them to specify what capabilities, outcomes they wanted, and we wanted them to frame them in terms of use case scenarios. So the first thing that we do is we develop scenarios. And we do this like every 6 months, whatever, with the community that goes and says, tell us all your issues and problems. And I'll get to some of those that we're doing right now with the community. And from that, we develop technical profiles which describe solutions that resolve the use case issues. For instance, and when we do this, we come out with what we call the target baseline. The target baseline is the future state. It doesn't mean that it's the current state that currently is available with COTS vendors right now or with GOTS. It means is where we want it to go, not where it currently can be. That's a big distinction, because when we try to do this from a viewpoint of saying, I know what we got, I know the COTS vendors. I talk to 3 to 5 vendors a week roughly, and I know exactly what's out there. I know their roadmaps, and we kind of influence their roadmaps in some way because we want to know where we want them to go. And so we push them in certain ways. And so what we wanted to do was to be able to say, okay, here's where we think the Air Force should be going to achieve its future mission goals. So that's the target baseline. And how do we get real products delivered then? Because target baseline is the target. And so what we have is the implementation baseline, which is developed by LCMC right now, which is a list of common computing environments, services that are associated that will be provided to everybody in the Air Force. Now, the issue becomes, okay, how do I know that the target baseline is really being implemented in the implementation baseline? Well, we have a scorecard. The target baseline consists of standards, protocols, guidelines, tech specifications, everything that you think that you need to have in the future state. And then we do a mapping between what the COTS products have or what GOTS products are developed, and we do the mapping against those requirements. So one of the scorecards that we have to develop all the time now is, okay, since the IB is out there, does it really comply with the target baseline? And the issue becomes then, when will it comply with the target baseline? So there has to be a pathway, a roadmap that says this is where we're going to go and this is how we're going to get there. So there is something that goes and says go forward. Okay. So what do we do? And this is what we kind of talked about before. The IB is really the standardized components in the architectures for each application. We want to be able to do, and I'll give you some examples when we get to a couple more slides. We want to be able to say every project, every program, every application, we use the word application now, I'll tell you why later, rather than system, because we want to be able to say every application is supposed to be using the standard environment. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And you all talked about it, because everyone is using a standardized environment within their little microcosm. And the reason is because of efficiency and speed, and it's also because of it decreases manpower, and it also decreases the cost for the licensing. So we want everybody to use these. Okay. And if you find that you can't use it for some reason, which is sometimes the case because people come in and say, my application is special. I'm doing special things. And we all know everybody thinks they're all doing special things, and everybody's doing kind of special things, but a lot of the infrastructure is really the same. They come back and say, okay, we need to do it. And we basically will say, okay, if it fits into the target baseline requirements, we may add it to the implementation baseline if it will serve the enterprise. And that's the whole point here. It has to serve the enterprise. And if it doesn't correspond to the target baseline, then you have to go back into the target baseline and get it into the target baseline, which means you have to go through the process of actually getting the technical profiles modified for various user case interfaces or reasons. So we have some issues with that. Now, when you talk about fielded-wise, the field capabilities is called the operational baseline. This is what's actually sitting in the field. The configurations within the field that are actually operational right now. Okay, and what this basically is taken together is a governance process. It's a governance process from the CIO's office that basically says, we do a target baseline, it's implemented in implementation baseline, and it's fielded in the operational baseline. And it has to be that way, and it has to be, and we have CCBs that coordinate what is actually being approved as the requirements. Okay? This is basically, what it is. Target based implementation based. You'll see that everybody talk about TBIBOB. If you ever hear that phrase, it's because they're talking about it as a union of baselines. And it's basically the to-be, the instantiation of the to-be, and the as-is. Okay? Now, we talked about this today in some of the meetings. What we wanted to do is provide services to capabilities for everybody in the Air Force. We wanted to get out of the business of hosting our own stuff, our own mission systems. We want to be able to utilize things that are out there already. We want to utilize various services from the commercial as well as from the DoD environment, which in this case is DISA and MailCloud. And we can do commercial too. We were trying to do that anyways. And we want to be able to manage and establish infrastructure basically as a system that modifies services. We manage the services, we manage the IT, and we adopt a standard-based approach. Now, we talked about that too. What standards, like VPEL is a standard. We, in the target baseline, identify the particular standards that we want the implementation baseline to follow. And then we map it against to make sure they do it. We want to be able to easily test new capabilities in an operational environment. Now, the easiest way to do this, and you'll see, we talk about this in a particular application, which is SMART, for instance. Well, SMART right now can actually, since they went to a standardized platform as a service, can actually run out a new release within a month to 2 month period. Now, it sounds impossible, but I'll tell you why, because they're actually, all the platform is really CN8 already, and they're inheriting everything below them, and all they're doing is changing code. And they inherit everything. And also there's GIE. And I'll get to more GIE later, but as part of this, we also support all the GIE IDTs, which is the main working bodies that determine what's going to be in the GIE architecture, and also the operational capabilities that we want GIE to be. Show you timelines. We come out with a major release, well, about three releases every year for the target baseline. And each release basically consists of scenarios and target profiles. The technical profiles are really the scenarios are the questions, what the community wants the capabilities to be. Technical profiles is what exactly are the requirements and guidelines associated with it. Each one of those is a separate release. It takes roughly 45 working days to get a release done. Sometimes it takes longer because CCB takes longer, and we have to get it signed off, and there's some bureaucratic issues with signing off things because it is releasable to the community. The target baseline is releasable to everybody in the community. So it's an open document. The implementation baseline is a little bit farther behind the target baseline because target baseline is future. So it takes a while for the implementation baseline to actually implement some of the things in the target baseline. And you see right now we're at target baseline 2. We're at implementation baseline 3.0. So it looks like they're ahead of us, but they're not really. It's just that they came out with some more implementation baselines before we actually came out with a finalized target baseline. So ignore the numbers. You'll see I'll delete the linkage of how we linked them together before. 3.1 is going to be the next IB, which is basically brings in enterprise services more into the idea because part of the idea was to have web services do some of the work, have widgets available to access those web services into mashups, which would alleviate some of the reporting requirements we have already in some of the systems that we have. Okay, how to get to the target baseline? We want you guys to participate in the target baseline. We really do. We want the functional community to be there. There's lots of ways. One of the biggest ways is we have our baseline scenario workshops, which are off-site discussions that we actually come out with what capabilities are required that the user community needs. We need you guys to tell us that. We had an off-site this last December or so with A4 and A2 and A6 and some MITRE people and some IDA people and some other people and some 38th was there. And it was a very interesting off-site because we decided that we wanted to do more of the data analysis, data strategy, data coordination, as well as mobility work. That was their big problems. So for next version of the target baseline, it's going to be more about that. What we usually do is we come out with topics, and sometimes, even in this particular situation, we had more topics than we actually had time to actually develop them. So we're going to push some more into target baseline 4.0, if you will, because we're working on 3. This was what happens, and we had to prioritize the topics. It doesn't mean we're never going to get to them. It's going to take a little bit longer to get to them. There's also other ways, too. as I talked about, if there's a mismatch between a desired IB system and what we have in the target baseline, we welcome to come in and we can talk about it and we can put it into one of the target baseline releases if necessary. But there has to be something to be done because we can incorporate it whenever we want to. So we want to be as agile and adaptive as we possibly can to the community. The implementation baseline has two particular on-ramps. One of them you probably don't know about yet. SAF has established a set of missionary integrators at SAF, which is supposed to coordinate across all of the Air Force in the particular areas. They're supposed to be knowledgeable of what's going on, and they're supposed to be the acquisition process point of you moving to the migrating to a particular cloud environment. Now, it's interesting because we never had this before. We never had at the CIO's office a coordination point for each of the mission areas. But now we have, and we're looking at, if you like EITDR, we're looking at that. We're going to be probably revising EITDR, linking it better with EMAS and some other things as well, trying to make sure that when they talk about a mission area, they understand all the mission areas. They understand what's in the mission area. They understand the funding profile for that particular application within that mission area. And when I talk about application, I mean to say, JIE defines, you like this, JFA defines a system as a set of applications, and they require us to have metrics on applications because they want to know if we migrate them, if we move them into a cloud infrastructure, how we link into the JIE infrastructure. So when we talk about things now, we talk about as applications because a system like AOC, for instance, has 30, 40, 50 applications, I think. We have to talk about migrating each one and changing each one. And the ITDR has to go down to that application level now. Okay, and the other way to get into the IB is basically to be part of the working group. What they do is they have a TB-IB coordination group because when we give them the TB, they have to look at it and say, oh, gee, this is impossible. That's the first reaction we get. The next reaction we get is, okay, you have to figure out exactly what you can do, what COTS tools, and what other way you want to build this. And so there's a TB-IB working group where we actually work with the implementers to help them understand what the requirements are so that when you go out and procure things, they can actually do it right. So we're trying to work with them all the time. So it's not like we dump the TB over to the LCMC people and they just look at it and can't figure it out. We actually help them all the time. Okay, let's talk about JIE. JIE is kind of interesting, and you guys, I'm sure, have heard of it. You may not know why it's there. We find that a lot of people don't understand JIE because they haven't been exposed to the underlyings of JIE. But basically it was because General Alexander came to the tank and basically said that you guys can't see what's in your network and you're going to have a cyber attack and you're not going to be able to defend against it. So why don't you fix it? Okay, that's basically it. And the tank said, yes, indeed, let's fix it. And so we came on this JIE mission about 4 years ago. And it's basically to do three things. Increase mission effectiveness. That's the number one priority, increase mission effectiveness. Second one was to increase security. Number two priority. And the last one should fall out of the first two, which was have IT efficiencies. Now, you may hear it backwards. You may say IT efficiencies is the end goal of JIE. It is not. Because we have meetings every 2 weeks, and believe me, it's all mission effectiveness. And the idea is get the money to get mission effectiveness. And you're going to see a lot more coming out about that very soon because it's required. Now, the big focus areas, the big rocks, were network normalization, data center consolidation, single, which is now called cyber security architecture, identity and access management, enterprise services. And we'll get to some of those. Okay, you guys need to understand how this works. So I'm going to make it simple. When we talk about data center consolidation, the requirement is that you either move to a core data center or you have a data center on the base called an installation processing node, but the installation processing node is only for people on the base. It is not an externally accessible site. It has to be mission-oriented applications that sit on the base. Otherwise, it has to go to the core data center. GSAW put out a directive that basically said everything has to move to the core data center by FY18. We all said that's impossible. Okay. However, you have to have a plan to show how you're going to get there, and you have to have it moved around in such a way that you do try to get there and move things accordingly. And the reason why you want to do this is because when you set up the infrastructure and we go to network normalization, you're going to see that the optical core, the CDCs are sitting on the optical core, and everything is to get your applications into that optical core realm so that you can have accessibility across the world. Now, there's also some things. There's also called a special processing node, SPPN. This was initially intended for medical. The hospital is unique. It's located within itself. People work within the hospital, and therefore it could be a special processing node. However, the caveat is here, if you want to access the DoD network, you have to go through one of the cybersecurity stacks, and that's either at an IPN, which is sitting on the base where the SPPN, or you have to go to the CDC directly, which is messier, so you better think about it. People like to say, I'm special, therefore I have to have a special processing. I'm a special processing node. They don't understand that the network is going to prevent them from doing anything if they're not careful. And I'll get to the network chart next. So, this is the problems we have with JE. Things are going to be imposed upon the infrastructure that may affect you. And it's important that if you have issues that are going to affect you, you tell us so that we can actually get them into the system to resolve how you're going to get things implemented. Because it's very important. And I'll tell you the next one. Next one is the JRSS. The Joint Regional Security Stack was an Army-initiated activity because basically the Army was not as centralized as the Air Force was. We have gateways. If you look at it the same way, the JRSS replaces the gateways, in essence. That's what they do. There's also that's the top stack of JRSS. You'll hear about two stacks in the JRSS. There's a bottom stack and a top stack. The top stack is mainly the gateways, more security. They directly interface with the internet access points. The bottom half is a router plus some data transaction analysis. Okay, what it means is that when JRSS go up, we will have to move all Air Force bases to the JRSS, which we have to move everything to the JRSS, all COM. The IPN at that point in time, the restriction will be if you're sitting at a base and you're people and you want to access the IPN at the base, you can. But if you want to access another IPN at another base, you will not be able to do that because the network will not let you route to that base. It'll let you route up to the CDC and out into the internet or out into the partner gateways, which is what everything else is connected to, but it won't let you route to another base. So that will change the infrastructure. The step sites are basically going to be on the optical core where they are right now, or they'll be moved and attached accordingly. So when we get satellite imagery into the steps, they'll be moved. So it's a question of how this all works with everything that's out there. If you want to get information into the J construct, you have to go through a partner gateway. Partner gateways are sitting outside of the JRSS realm. They're another gateway level. So if we have communications that have to flow through the gateway, we need to know that, because you will have significant delays if we do not know that. And we do want to make sure that everything works properly. So as we progress down the JIA path, we need your inputs as to what you think are going to be critical issues that need to be resolved. Because very quickly, within 2 years, you're going to have JRSS sitting out there and everything's going to be moved accordingly to that network. And this is a joint thing. So remember, all Air Force, Navy, Army, Marine Corps will be connected to the JRSS stacks. So it's interesting also, just for those who are on the base, if you have joint tenants on a base, you have to support those tenants with also the data center. That's another issue. Okay. People usually ask, okay, you've done this, you've put governance structure, it's really cool. What have you really done? You know, we do a lot of paper drills, we do a lot of PowerPoint, we do a lot of Visios, we do everything. And everybody says, hey, that's perfect. Show me something that will work for my system. We get that all the time from the PMs, like, tell me if this is real or not, because I can't possibly go to that unless I know it's real, because it's too risky for me and I need to get my job done. Okay? So the first target baseline that we came out with answered two questions. How to expedite user access to enterprise applications and networks, and what should we use for migrating to a cloud? Okay? First one. We came up with, the outcome was enterprise level security. Basically, it's a dynamic ABAC solution. You're going to hear about some ABACs. You're going to hear about this one. This is our dynamic ABAC solution based on person's attributes. We've now been working on this for, I think, 3 years. And we're finally getting somewhere. We also came out with what are the requirements for the platform as a service components and what are the virtualization components necessary. And these include web services as well as widgets, as well as some other things. And we'll get to how, you'll get to how, for the next slide, you'll see how we actually moved this into the IB. So it's real live things. Okay, baseline release 3. First piece was, okay, we said platforms as a service. The IB has come out with 3 Java platforms and 1 .NET platform and some database. Right now, based on the CIO memo of well, which one is? AFGM as well as the CIO memo, it is incumbent upon all new and modernizing applications to utilize the TB and the IB. Now ask me how we're going to enforce that. You know, how can you possibly say that? You know, because PM's going to go off on the side. Well, we also have a compliance issue in the enterprise architecture side. And the compliance issue in the enterprise architecture side says, oh, if you don't comply to the IB and the TB because that's the requirement, we are not going to make you, we're not going to pass the next milestone. It's real simple. So, fair warning is that the guidance is out there, the governance is out there, it's been in an AFI already. Everything is there to support the governance structure and how you go forward with it. And believe me, we basically almost stopped the financial system from going forward the next milestone. In fact, we let them go to the next one milestone, but the next milestone we're going to stop them if they're not IB compliant. And when we talk about stopping a financial system, we're talking about really hankering down, because you never stop financial systems. But we're at that point now where we have to go and standardize across the board. Also, you're going to see standardization of that the ELS component is basically in IATT mode right now, working in MIL cloud. We're testing it, and probably 3.1 will come out, the release, and it'll probably say ELS will be in the required list for 3.1. Now, we always talked about, and you guys talked about this too, why would you want to do this? Well, because if you look at the chart, there's two things everybody does. There's lead time, there's accreditation time, and there's development time. You can't get rid of the development time, right? You try to make it agile, you try to make it faster, but the lead time is how you set up, and the accreditation time is how you do CNA. Remember, what happens, though, is that if we can decrease the two, in which we do, if we provide the infrastructure as a service environment for the applications, which we are going to do as part of the IB, and we inherit all the CNA controls from that same infrastructure, you're going to eliminate, minimize setup and the finalization of that to get your final product out the door. And this is interesting because, as I told, Smart does this now. Smart does this really quickly, and it's amazing how well they do it. And Smart was one of the first things we moved into MIL Cloud. So MIL Cloud does exist. It has its flaws. Everything does when it's new. However, what's more interesting is that we are driving MIL Cloud to be what we want it to be. It's kind of different. It's a different way of looking at it. Before, just used to dump stuff to us and say, here it is, good luck. Now we're doing the other thing. We're saying we're working with DISA to make sure that we get what we want. It's kind of a different way of looking at life. So when you hear DISA is terrible, we understand that. We're trying to make them better because there's few alternatives out there. And if you think commercial is much better, believe me, you haven't worked with the commercial side yet. Smart is a financial. It's a system where acquisition PMs are assigned, and they run their acquisition programs at the top level with Smart. fact, we kind of integrate smart data into our system at the same time, because when you say I want to migrate an application, we know exactly who the PM of that application should be and what their funding profile is, everything else, because it's all in Smart. Okay. Okay, what do we get out of when we, the real results was that we have more secured applications, which is required. We have to expedite access control. What we wanted to do for ELS was to make sure that when you got to a base, when an airman got to a base, that they had everything they needed for access. Usually access takes 3 months for people to get everybody they need when they move to a base, so they have 3 months of dead time. So dynamic ABAC control basically said, based upon your attributes, we are going to give you access to the systems you need when you get to wherever you're going to get and your role changes. So if your role changes tomorrow, we wipe out your old access, we add your access back in. We also need a consistent model for the platform and CNDSP reporting. This is where all the CNA is, and it'll be, what we'll get is we'll need fewer and fewer people to actually maintain and manage the activities. And again, we get all the CNA based upon, the stack. So what, ELS is out there right now. It meets DoD, it meets the JIE IDAM strategy and reference architecture. We've been pushing our enterprise level security into JIE. We've talked to the Army, we've talked to all the components. We've shown all the components our stuff. We've actually shown the Marine Corps our platform as a service capability. Because they want to join us and partly with the Army to figure out what the standard platform should be across DoD. And that sounds strange because we're actually working with other components. You guys probably don't realize that, especially the Marine Corps. But really, we are all working together to achieve the same result. It's called mission effectiveness, because guess what? We all have to work together to get the mission done, especially when we go out into the field. Okay? The operational baseline, things that we're doing for the operational baseline right now is we are doing a automated asset inventory. We're trying to get all the assets in the Air Force inventoried automatically through a set of tool sets. And on top of that, we're overlaying what the application should be. So we are looking at various ways of doing this. We have several pilots out there right now which are working on what kind of tool set we need. We want to make sure that this is consistent with what we want to go forward with, so it's some sustainment, that we don't have to do an inventory every year of everything, especially the applications. And the applications are important because, as I said, we're trying to move things to JIE. We're trying to move things to particular cloud environments, either the DoD or the commercial cloud environment. We need to know all the applications, and we need to determine which ones are actually going to move or not. And so when we prioritize the applications and we move them, we'll be moving them according to what's in the IB, and making sure that we meet our FDCCI goals, which is the other looming thing that we have laying on the side. Okay, release 2, which we just came out with, was we had two questions. So it's kind of interesting questions. First one was, okay, ELS basically said for security reasons you have to have an end-to-end encryption between the requester and the provider. But network people said we really want to be able to break that transaction all the time. And so we had one side of security people saying you want to break the transaction, another side of security people saying you couldn't break the transaction. This is a never-ending battle between I want to see everything, but you can't see it because as soon as you break it, you have man in the middle. Second one was, okay, how can I move, if I'm going to field my thing into mil cloud, how can I easily field the same thing into the commercial cloud? Or can I just move it into an IPN? We're going to have applications that are actually going to exist in probably 3 environments: mil cloud, IPN, and maybe even a commercial. So we said, let's figure out a way where we can do this once and just move it. So that was the intent. And so we came up with what we call the virtual application data center concept, which we currently are starting to test right now. And let's go into some of that. But basically what we wanted to do was, or we're going to do, is we're going to combine the network analysis components into a virtualized data center with the rest of the platform. So now the platform is going to be enlarged. It's going to be enlarged with basically firewalls and other network security devices, and that will be the new platform. And the reason why we're going to do this is two things. First of all, this will allow us to actually tailor the security to each application, which we haven't been able to do before. And it'll also be a way for us to more easily change things as we go forward for an application. Because we're not changing it for the entire enterprise. We're now changing it per application base. Now, you're going to say, oh, this is going to cost more money. Not really. Most of the stuff is virtualized right now out there. We are pushing ourselves into a total virtualized environment now. Firewalls are virtualized. You'd be surprised. Everyone's virtualized. And the reason why they went that way is because software-defined networking is coming along. And software-defined networking means that I have to have all my network components in a virtualized environment. So guess what? Everything, network components, network analysis tools are all virtualized right now. Or if they're not, each one is on the pathway to virtualize it because they know they won't be in the software-defined networking environment if they don't. So we're going to make use of that fact. We're going to combine it together into this virtualized data center capability, and that's going to be, we're going to say is going to be one of the things we're going to go forward with as how you can we can now break the transaction at the application level and do the analysis necessary as opposed to breaking it in the middle. Okay, again, what we're trying to do is have more security. More security for the application itself, basically trying to tailor it down to what we want to have it to and be able to move things around. Once we do this, the CNDSP becomes easier because it's consistent now. Before, if you look at what's happening, the MilCloud has its own CNDSP. Well, if we translate this into, I want to move it to a cloud environment, I can't move half the stuff that's in DISA land right now unless I virtualize it, everything's there. So this is a way of moving it across various data centers. And it'll actually make the CNDSP more consistent across all the applications that we have, no matter where they reside. That's one of the requirements. And that will mean less manpower, which is always good. There'll be more standardization across the board, lets us manage it better, lets us patch it better, it lets us find out if there's any vulnerabilities faster. It will also let us have scale for licensing, because we want to do enterprise-level agreements across the board for everything that we have on our platforms so that we can move it everywhere, and it'll only cost us the cheapest amount of money we have. This is the intent of all this. Now you see, I said, and it becomes more mission effective. Okay. Basically, to show you some synergy that we have between Release 1 and Release 2 is basically as we put together the enterprise-level security plus the virtual application data center, we're calling it SEED, Security Encapsulated Application Data Center, Enclave, we've now gone to the viewpoint of where JIA is actually going to. JIA goes to the viewpoint of I'm guarding the data. The data is most important. Bad guys want to get to the data or destroy the data. That's what they want to do. That's where they're going. So therefore, we are having an effect of saying, okay, once we put enterprise-level security on it, which means we are controlling the access to the data by person, by role, by attribute, and at the same time, we are then doing the network analysis by application. We have now moved ourselves down to the application level and the tailoring of the application. So we're trying to guard the data as much as we can. That's not two. Okay. And this is just cramming things together. You don't need to see it. Okay, IB 3.1. This is the next IB level. We're going to incorporate the plans for LCMC to actually put in some things for portability in terms of enterprise services. What we said across the board, we have to have enterprise services, right? You have to have standardization of those. Well, guess what? The assumption always be that enterprise services is sitting in the facility that you have. Well, not really when you go to a cloud environment. Unless we set up a separate virtual data center for enterprise services, they're not going to exist. We have not found that out after going to MilCloud. And so one of the lessons learned we had was that when we field an application, We need to feel enterprise-level services as another virtual application, virtual data center that the applications can feed off of. So simple things like electronic signature, all of a sudden, have to be pushed into a separate facility or separate data center in the virtualized environment. Now, this is not obvious. You're surprised, because we assumed that ACAS and HBSS were going to be there because they're standardized configurations. That wasn't the case. We have to provide that in an enterprise services capability. So when we, and this is important though, because as we learn now that when we move to a commercial cloud, we have to move that with us. So moving to a commercial cloud is not trivial. Let's put it that way. There's some things you have to realize you have to take with you that you normally assume is sitting there already, that somebody's providing it for you, because they're not providing it anymore. And so as we work through this, we found that we had to do lots of things. And this is going to be part of the next release into basically IV 3.1 is what utilities, what enterprise services are going to be rolled out as part of the release that everybody's going to have to follow. And this gets interesting because when we say everybody, we mean all new and emerging applications are going to have to utilize these enterprise services. And therefore, we'll have common APIs across the board. This is what we're doing. We're on TV Release 3 right now, which is our next release that we're working with. How do I manage mobile platforms? And this is an interesting one because mobile platforms means airplanes as well as our phones. So understand, this will probably affect part of you guys too. How do we do enterprise search for information? We've been working on this for a while already with data tagging and incorporating, again, it's guarding the data and using ELS probably to control access to data. We use ELS now to control access to systems or applications. This is saying all the data that you have out there, we're going to have to tag it. And I'll tell you, there's lots of reasons why. Most of the reasons are because for enterprise search and discovery, we have to discover every electronic piece of information in the Air Force, which sounds impossible. And it is right now. But for FOIA requests, for litigation requests, for all these things, that is the requirement from justice. If it's electronic, it's sitting in your system somewhere, it should be discoverable. Otherwise, we have to get rid of it. And right now, you know, records management was supposed to be this little piece. Well, records management is now everything that's electronic. So we're in kind of a mess with that one. So we're trying to figure out a strategy right now. We have some pilots as to how they actually tag information. Information means anything. It could be email. It could be your documents that you save on your hard drive that we have to keep somehow. It could be your Excel spreadsheets. Anything that you have, even your chat sessions, are electronic, and if they're stored, it's a problem. So we may see some radical changes in how everything's done because we have to take control of this now. It's getting worse. There's an OMB directive to actually do this a couple of years. And the question is, how do I manage and integrate data from various sources? This is a good one because this is a problem that 8.2 has, 8.4 has. I'm sure you guys have it too. This came into, you know, and we have it in some way with enterprise-level security because we want to be able to recognize authoritative data sources and designate them as such and have some data governance on authoritative data sources and how you use the data. So the problem we have is that how do you actually take all the authoritative data that we have in the Air Force and actually use it for something and make sure that the systems that are out there are using the authoritative data only. Okay? So we are going to have to set up a data governance issue, a data control issue out there, and it's all be rolled under compliance again, which basically we're going to try to figure out and say, okay, you should be using an authoritative data source for your information flows. This means we have to provide enough capabilities to actually identify those and keep them up to date. But for compliance, we're going to ask that question. What data sources are you using? Are they compliant or not? Are they authoritative or not? And that's going to cause ripples, and therefore we need the programs to understand that they cannot just grab any data set that they have out there that they believe is authoritative without it being declared as such. Because again, we're trying to guard the data. We're trying to guard the temporal nature of the data and make sure it's correct. Because otherwise you can pull something that's 2 months old and you will never know it, and if it's shoved into a mission system, we're going to be in trouble. So that's the next coming of Release 3. Basically, what we're trying to do at an enterprise level is to provide an environment that everybody can work with. We use the kitchen as a good example. We're going to give you a modern-day, beautiful kitchen with everything in it that you could possibly want, and you are going to make the recipes. If you need an appliance, you need something special, you need to tell us and we'll provide it to you. But again, this is the enterprise kitchen. You guys have to work in the enterprise kitchen. You can't go outside the enterprise kitchen and do something else. This is the equivalent to it. And so we just need to know what you guys want to bake, if you will, cook. Okay? Questions? Usually a ton.
It's on. Good. Sir, just was wondering if there is any major weapon systems that are currently using this or are planning to start using it.
Yes.
Any names?
No. Yes, they are current. There's several weapon systems that are going to be modernized, and they will have to be using this. We won't get into what they are, but yes, there are several weapon systems that have to go down this path.
Okay, thanks.
Sir, can you talk about how the Air Force's target baseline and implementation baseline are going to connect to what JIE is doing?
We're driving JIE. Okay, I'm the Air Force rep to JIE. I work with JIE every day. I push ELS into JIE. I can push the passes into JIE because right now JIE is an infrastructure, not really a whole infrastructure wanton capability. So the question is, what do we want to make JIE out of, not what JIE is going to give us? And this is always the case. We can drive it or we can wait patiently and be given it. We've chose to drive it because we believe that we have the best technologies out there. And if we don't, that's okay. We just have to realize that. But if we don't drive it, we're going to be handed a set of stuff that says, here it is, good luck. It's now if you don't do it, you're compliant. So we are driving JIE.
And could you just say how much of what you just talked about is actually there now?
In JIE?
No, in target baseline implementation.
Target baseline, the platforms as service are there. They've been mandated already, so they're there. The scripts are there to generate them when the apps is using it. The ELS is in testing right now, and that'll be done. We try to get the ATO in April. We'll see how far that goes. We have funding issues, of course. What else is there? But it's progressing out. So if you wanted to use it today, we would say, yes, we are going to be migrating applications into MilCloud within a month with the standardized process. What you don't know is we have a standardized process right now from the staff viewpoint. We have a process that you come in and tell us you want to migrate. We go through the process with you of validating your data level, determining where you want to go, working with the LCMC Managed Service Office, which actually does the engineering analysis to determine how many external interfaces you have and how to migrate them. We determine what infrastructure you're going to go into, what paths you're going to select, and we move you there. We pretty much have gotten it down now in a process that everybody's agreed to. In fact, they had a meeting today on it, and we're going to start pushing apps through it now. First app being PEX.
Thank you.
Are you having problems with getting developers? So you gave an analogy of this really high-end kitchen. Do you have any problems getting the 5-star chefs to cook in it?
I don't know. That's you guys, right? You have any problem with the? Well, the question. Okay. Let's be serious. I'm going to have to get off the stage. The question really is, and I was a contractor too, so understand this. I was there. The question is, for us in the Air Force, we want to do standardization. Right now, as a contractor, my discriminators are I do things uniquely and I have unique liaisons with other COTS products vendors, right? That's where I get my discriminators from. We're trying to get to the point where we're saying, okay, that's really cool, but we don't really care anymore. You're going to have to use our standardized environment. We're going to give you a development environment, a test environment, a production environment, because we want to save efficiencies and we want to be secure. And the question is, you have to provide developers that work in this, and what's really going to happen is, the emphasis now is, you have to have developers that understand the processes, because you're doing the mission stuff now. Not that you understand uniqueness of some COTS tools that you have been associated with it. You're going to have to understand, really, SME-wise, what's really going on. So we're moving it from one end of, how you do discriminators to another end of discriminators. Says we want agility. We want you to understand the process. We need SMEs that understand things. We want something that be creative in terms of a mission, as opposed to, don't worry about the infrastructure. We don't really care. We're giving it to you. Okay? She's getting me off the stage.
Sorry to cut this short. I know you all have a lot of questions. Please give Mr. Knisley a round of applause.
I just have one comment. It's not a question. Someone asked about weapon systems, and I would just like to give a plug that Jason Seba and Jeremy Burton are working on getting Space and Missile Systems Center weapon systems into JIE if you're interested in working with them. So just wanted to give a plug for that.
Thank you, Ms. Gons. So Mr. Knisley will also be here for the panel discussion on Thursday if you're interested to ask him for more questions. With that said, we're going to take a very quick break, and the speakers of the next session, could you please come up here to the front to meet your session chair? Thank you.